Welcome to the Dynasty Strategies panel. My name is Garrett Price. We're excited to hang out with you guys for the next hour, just talking about different strategies, ways to look at your Dynasty fantasy football leagues. And we've got some of the foremost experts on the platform here. So what I'm going to have you guys do is I'm going to have you guys start off, give your name, the site you're affiliated with, and how long you've been playing, not fantasy, but specifically Dynasty fantasy football.
Can you guys hear me okay? Hi, my name is Michael Bauer. I'm host of the Dynasty Rewind Fantasy Football Podcast. Am I not talking loud enough? Up here? Is that better? Oh, sorry. I don't want to yell. Sorry. All right, I'm just going to do this. So I've been playing Dynasty for about 7 years now. I'm doing the podcast for 4-ish. So, hey, Shane, glad you can make it. So I'll pass it on over to Shane Manila here.
Hey, what are we talking about? Shane Manila, Dynasty trades in 5.
How many years have you been playing Dynasty?
Oh, Dynasty? Well, so I'm 40 old, so like a lot of you guys, like 30 years or so, right? You guys aren't all 10 years. 10 years,
a decade.
Obviously, Shane didn't hear the original question. It's supposed to be, what is your name, where do you play, or where do you do work, and then how long have you played Dynasty? You've definitely not played Dynasty for 30-plus years.
No. Dynasty since Odell Beckham Jr.
Yes.
Made the game fun for everyone.
Yes, 2014 was my first year. Yes,
14,
that's
yeah.
when a lot of us probably started. 2014, I'm Scott Connor at Charles Chill FFB on Twitter. Dynasty Trades in 5, Destination Debbie, Freelancer, DLF, a lot of other stuff. Thanked to be here. Good stuff. Pass it over to Izzy.
Izzy Elkaffas, Dynasty Trade Calculator, and I've been playing Dynasty for 16. Those will be 16 years.
Rich Dotson, Dynasty Nerds, and been playing Dynasty for 19 years.
Rich,
Almost 20.
we'll let you start off.
Oh, thank you so much.
I'm a lobby of softball here. What makes Dynasty your preferred platform?
Well, I mean, I was talking about this earlier with my friends over at DLF, and we were just talking about it. I mean, I think the good way to look at it as well is like what other platforms we were talking about this is that you literally go to a game and sign up, and the entry fee is $100. And you're like, okay, here's my entry fee. And you know you have a 0.0% chance to win that league that year. Like, there's not many games out there that you play where you're willing to commit your money to that, and you're happy to do it. Like, you're excited about it because you got this high draft pick. So I think the community that Dynasty brings together, a way to keep your friends intact in a group chat along those lines for 365 days a year. I think it's the one game that kind of sells itself and gets you excited. It's the one game that you play that you're like, once you do it once, I have to do it again. Like I gotta do another league. I gotta try this format. And it's so broad that you have so many different options to play that game. That's what makes it, for me, the funnest game to play in the world.
Anybody else? Any other thoughts on like why you like Dynasty? Shane, we'll go to you. Why you like Dynasty more than redraft or daily fantasy or whatever?
Right. So I like to pretend that I'm an artist, and there feels like there's creativity in Dynasty, right? Because there's different strategies, there's different ways to build, there's different things you can do to fix your team, build your team. There's different ways you can build for this year, next year. Redraft, it's fun, but I play this year, no one wants to trade because it's redraft. If I'm bad this year, well, what do I have to look forward to? If I'm bad this year in Dynasty, all right, I can just immediately change gears and start looking towards next year, what I can do. So I just think I like the fact that you can be creative in not just the content space, but in the game itself.
Let's get into some of the actual strategies now. So, Mike, why don't we have you start with this one? In a startup, what are some things that you're looking to do to help give you the best possible chance to win?
So one of the things that I want to talk about is the tight end position. If you listen to the show, you know I love talking about tight ends. But here's the thing. Everyone says if you don't have the top 2, you're screwed. But you can't always have the top 2 tight ends, especially if it's tight end premium. So one of the things that I like to do is something called punt the premium. So if it's super flex, I wait until later. I grab guys like Daniel Jones, Geno Smith, guys like that. You can't get Kelsey, Andrews, Kittle. You get guys like Greg Dulcich. You have to look for someone like Darren Waller, Evan Ingram, guys like that. So I love to punt the premium and try to get good value elsewhere. I was thinking I was getting good value drafting Jonathan Taylor in the first round everywhere this year, and I guess I screwed myself a little bit. So Jonathan
You
Taylor.
can't predict
please come back.
everything.
I know, I try. So I'm a big punt the premium guy, and it's a risky strategy, and it does take a lot of work year in, year out because you have to keep replenishing everything. But that's the point of Dynasty. It keeps you involved year round, and that's why I love the game too, just to go back to your previous question. And also seeing everybody here. Thank you, everybody, for coming out. And Doug came to the panel. He said he was going to. Thanks, Doug.
Yeah, they must love you guys. They could have been watching Des Bryant right now. They're hanging out with
We
you
are
guys.
way better than Des Bryant. Let's give it up for Des, but let's hear it for the Dynasty Strategy panel. Come on, everybody. Thank you.
All right, who else? In a startup, Scott, you want to take this? In a startup, what are some things that you like to do to maximize your chance to win, whether it be this year or long term?
Yeah, in the startup, so everyone knows that follows me, I'm a portfolio player. I play in a ton of leagues. I have a ton of money in the pot across a ton of different leagues. So my only goal in a startup is to build my bank. I want to get as much value as possible. I don't care if I win, but it's also embracing the variance. The thing about Dynasty is we, as a fantasy space, the one thing that doesn't get talked about enough is how much variance there is in a season. I could give you, if you're in a league that has 10 starters, I could literally say, I'm going to give you 10 of the best 20 players. You probably only have like a 40% chance of winning that league. You can never outrun the variance that exists in an NFL season. So in a startup, my goal is to pick a direction. It kind of depends on the board. Like Mike said, like he doesn't want to take an early quarterback. There might be 3 teams in your startup in a super flex that go, I need to get 2 elite quarterbacks. They sell the farm to go do it. At that point, you got to be able to read the room and say, I'm going to go in a different direction because I don't want to be going in the same direction as everybody else in my league. Because then the only thing that separates me is, do I pick players better than you, better than you, better than you? That's not an edge. If you think you have an edge in just picking the best players, there's way too many people out there already doing that. There's way too much content focused on that. A good Dynasty player is consuming all that content. So there's not an edge saying, yeah, I can just pick which players are going to be good. And then you try to translate that to an entire season. So embrace the variance, lean into just accruing value. Anybody that's seen me talk about trading, it's leverage trading. Finding dead spots where the values are flat, give me an extra pick thrown into a trade. Trade a receiver for another receiver and a second. And I'm praying on the fact that someone else thinks they can pick which player is better than the others. And I'm just going, nah, I'll take the chances that they're wrong and maybe my player ends up being the same. So I just accrue as much value as possible. Then when you get into year 2 and year 3, there's going to be teams that their plans blew up in the first year. And they are now in a desperate range where they need picks, they need quarterbacks, they need whatever it is. So I want to be able to go to my bank when I need it. And it's a bonus if my team's competing in the first year. What do I have? A bunch of extra value to go, you know what? During the season, I can spend a little of that money in the bank. It's like splurging once a year for a vacation. There's a time where you go, I don't really care about the money. I'm just going to have fun. I want to win. I want to chase points. But I never want to be in a spot where it's like, yeah, I'm competing, but I don't have anything left in the bank. Because if it goes wrong, then your team's drawing dead in the future.
Izzy, do you have a specific strategy that you almost always go in with, or does it change depending on the draft?
Yeah, I mean, doing this over the last 16 years, you try a whole bunch of different things. But if I'm in a league that I really respect the owners, I go into it and thinking, okay, if we're starting from scratch with 12 really good owners, the odds of me winning are less than 10%. So it's like, so I focus immediately on the future when there's more people focusing on the current. And I try to build a team where I could at least backdoor into a potential championship year 1 if things actually work the right way. Some of the shots that I've taken have panned out. So I will try to accrue a lot of future first-round picks while also having a team that could backdoor, which is really difficult to do, but you got to find the opportunities like Scott was saying, is just finding values, like taking some of those older players. You can sprinkle in a few older guys that could help you win now, that could either be your pivot to backdoor or a trade piece to help a contender once those surface later on. So by week 3 or 4, I can determine where I want to go with my roster year 1. So that's kind of my focus in a startup, is just kind of focusing on the future and trying to get to the future before everybody else does.
Yeah. Shane, talk to us a little bit about win now teams versus rebuild teams. Like we throw that around a lot, but what does that actually look like?
I mean, so win now, again, if you follow me, you know I throw the word hammer around. that's when you're going hammer hunting, right? That's when, like Scott was saying, hey, I'm going to splurge because it's vacation time. Rebuilding, I guess you want to split assets, right? If you got to look at your roster, determine how bad off is this? Is like this a legit rebuild or is this just a reload? Do I just need to reallocate some of my assets? Like, am I just too heavy at the running back position when my team's not really built for that? And should I just get out and maybe get equal valued wide receivers because obviously they last longer and they're ascending assets? One thing I will say is like rebuilds. I feel like people sometimes look at them and they go, "Oh, it's 2, 3, 4 years." Like if you're looking that far ahead to rebuild, you're probably not doing it right. To be polite, because not everyone here knows me, so I don't want to say like you're bad, but you're not doing this game correctly. It shouldn't take you 3 to 4 years to rebuild. First of all, there's like Scott's game. There's too much variance. Like I can't, as much as I love Justin Jefferson and as much as I love Chris Olave, right? I can't say today that in 4 years Chris Olave is going to be the wide receiver 3 overall. What I can probably predict is that Tyreek Hill is going to be a wide receiver 1 in 2 years, something like that.
Yeah. Rich, you talk a lot about, when we're talking about win now versus rebuild, you talk a lot about being stuck in the middle and how that's a place that we don't really want to be. What do you mean when you talk about that?
Yeah, I think one of the things in Dynasty, I think it's really easy to get stuck in the middle, right? Where like you just made the playoffs or, you just missed the playoffs. And I think it's really easy to get lost in there because what you don't realize being stuck in the middle is, yeah, your team's kind of good, but you're not looking at your league as a whole, right? Because I look at it, you need to be either all in on both sides of the spectrum. Either you're all in on the rebuild or you're all in on the championship, one or the other. You're never in the middle because it's so easy to be like get inflated because some teams are doing it right. They're blowing it up. So they have no assets. So those bottom 3 teams are automatically pushing you up to the 4 seed, the 5 seed, the 6 seed. Meanwhile, you think you're doing better, but the other teams are doing better by making their teams worse. So for me, it's just one way or the other. If I have 2 years in a row where I'm 6, 7, 8, first team out of the playoffs, like I know I'm doing something wrong. My team's not in a good spot. And putting the time to look at my league as a whole, because it's so easy to get tunnel vision, definitely in Dynasty where you have these couple really good assets, like, the Justin Jeffersons and Tyreek Hills, but your whole team as a whole is not good. So you feel like you're on the way, but meanwhile, 3 years go by, you're constantly being the first team eliminated in playoffs, you're never making the championship game, and before you know it, you've lost all your value because now these guys are old, and you can be in a position to have 3 first-round picks compared to maybe 1 first-round pick, and now you're trying to invest in 1 extra draft pick where you literally have a 50% chance of hitting on that draft pick. We did a show a couple weeks ago going back the last 10 years of all these rookie drafts, all the ADP, and it was literally 50% were even startable players. And that's just the first round. And then the second round. So you get caught up in that saying, okay, I'll just take this first and it might make the team a little bit better. But then by the time that player even shows that he's capable of contributing to your team, a couple years may have gone by again. So either I'm getting all the draft picks and all the young guys, or I'm getting all the players that are going to help me win a championship now. It's never being in the middle because if you stay stagnant there, you're just going to consistently get passed up.
Yeah.
I'll let you go in a second. I wanted to add something to what he was saying. Izzy brought it up in the startup strategy, but I think there's a little bit of a misnomer about what is being stuck in the middle. If you're stuck in the middle, anybody out there in a league where you have like the 4th or 5th best team, but you've got there and you've traded your future picks and you don't have liquid assets, that's stuck in the middle. I'm totally fine being in a league where I have the 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th best team if I have money in the bank. Because then once I have more information during the season, I can chase the variance that might go my way. Really stuck in the middle is I built this team, I've seen some rosters where people trade their next 2 years of picks and they have the 4th best team. That's the team that's in trouble. That's the team that needs to literally look at their best player and go, I need to split that asset, tier down at receiver, quarterback, or whatever, and pick up an extra first. But it's not to make the first. It's not to go, I need to hit on another player in the draft. It's to, I need to get that player that I tiered down to, hopefully can kind of bridge the gap, keep me in that middle where I'm still in the playoffs, but the first gives me a way to bail myself out at another position later. So you just don't want to operate in the middle with no assets. With a team where you go, every one of my players is good and productive, but as soon as I try to add them to a deal, I can't move up, And as soon as I try to liquidate them and get future picks, people go, nah, I don't want to pay a first, or I don't want to pay a second. So that's, I think, truly stuck in the middle. And it's kind of what Izzy was saying. I don't know if you had something to add, but you were saying in a startup, kind of build a crusty team that can still compete early, but you have that insurance on the back end where if it goes wrong, I still have picks in the bank for the next 1 or 2 years to kind of supplement what I might have missed on in the startup.
Yeah, I can add on to a little bit on what I do is if I'm in the first round, I'll try to take a young quarterback, right? So I get my young quarterback locked in. That's my QB1. And then
In a super flex,
in a
right?
super flex, yep. And then rounds 2, 3, 4 are when I look at it like a portfolio. I think Scott kind of mentioned a little bit too. It's when you have these top end players, the only place they can really go is down. So when you're drafting in the second round, the third round, the fourth round, the likelihood of those players sustaining that position over the course of a long period of time is significantly lower than somebody that can ascend. So I tend to dump out of the second, third, and fourth round, maybe even the fifth round, acquire those first round picks for the future, and then stack an additional sixth, an additional seventh, an additional eighth. So then I can, yeah, sure, I don't have those second and third and fourth round current high end players, but I could take now 4 to 8 guys in that 6 to 9 round where they could ascend into being top 3, 4 round players in the future. And that's how I can backdoor into a championship. And like I said, every time somebody, if you want to be first to something, right? So if you're going to try to compete, you got to figure out how do I make sure that if I'm going to compete year one, I'm going to be first to the trade market and getting those top end players that can help me compete. And if you're going to rebuild or at least punt year one, you want to be the first one to get to that table because that's going to give you the best chance of success in year 2, 3, 4, and 5.
And you guys have all kind of touched on it, but we haven't said it directly. In your startups, some people will go all in. Other people will go more, and I think, is Ryan still there, McDowell? He coined the term productive struggle.
Yeah.
You know, some people will go more the productive struggle route. So, and that ties in with more of a rebuilding team or a contending team. Do you guys, in your startups, do you find yourselves leaning one way or another where I'm trying to build a team to win now because I don't know what tomorrow holds or the next year holds, or I like to have more of a long-term outlook when I'm drafting, and I want to try to acquire more assets, more future picks? Whoever wants to take that one.
Yeah, I'll touch on it again. When you first start a league, it's even across the board, right? You're starting at 0. So year one is the hardest to win, in my opinion. Year one is the hardest to win because we're all on this equal playing field. I want to set myself to where I have the best chance of winning year 2. And then some people have shot themselves in the foot doing other things, or they've put their equity in the wrong places, and that's eliminated 3 or 4 teams for year 2 just based on how their league, how their team is played out. So now I have 1 of 8 chances to win. I view like year 1, you have 1 of 12. Every single year after that, teams will continually shoot themselves in the foot building the wrong team, shrinking the amount of teams that actually have a chance to compete. So I want to win for multiple years. I don't want to win year 1 and then struggle year 2, 3, 4. I want to win year 3 and then compete 4, 5, 6, and 7.
Yeah.
So one thing with the startup, I want to get the most expensive assets I can at the cheapest rate I'll ever be able to get them. And at Superflex, that's obviously the quarterback. So Scott, I play in a few leagues with him, couple. So literally 3, 4 years ago, we just went, why are we trading back for additional value? Why don't we just trade back into the first round, skip the second, skip the third round, get 2 top 5, 6, 7 quarterbacks? I can get the other assets. Like, I don't mean to say Justin Jefferson's replaceable, but he's more replaceable than Jalen Hurts. So just something simple like that. And Izzy keeps touching on it. Don't burn your future assets. Like, I don't want to be trading my first round pick in 24, 25. I think I'm smart. People disagree. That's fine. But I'm smart enough to know, like, I don't know what's going to happen this year. I could draft Jalen Hurts, Justin Herbert. They could both go out there. Something bad could happen, and my team is dead. And I'll have picks, and I have no outs. I have no flexibility to build upon that team going forward.
So let's move into, and we've kind of been looking at it from a super flex perspective, and I think we've gotten to the point in fantasy football where that is becoming much more common, that most startups aren't one quarterback anymore, they're super flex, and we're seeing a lot more tight end premium as well, which means that on the catch, the tight end would get 1.5 or 1.7 or 2 points as opposed to just the normal PPR. Mike touched on it in the very, very beginning, but if you guys could talk about your strategies with those premiums, because I think that's one of the bigger things that kind of changes people's perspectives and their values on when do I draft the tight end, when do I take the quarterbacks, who do I go all in with. So touch on your thoughts on that type of strategy.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, I've done a lot of research on tight ends. Quite frankly, they don't matter in any format outside of literally until you bump it up to like 3 PPR. That's the point where the player landscape from a production standpoint is the same as receivers and running backs. So I'll just nip this in the bud. 1.5 tight end premium, it's exactly what Mike said. Get the positional advantage guys, they don't matter. 1.75 doesn't matter. 2 PPR, it only goes out to about the top 10, top 12. So talking about how you really want Chiga Conquo, like you better bet that he's going to finish top 5 or top 6, otherwise you're wasting a pick. So for me, that's one of the biggest realities I've had over the last couple of years. I play in a ton of 2 tight end leagues with 2 PPR. I over roster tight ends. If you want to waste roster spots, it is wasting roster spots on guys like Zach Kuntz. Literally the next best tight end, because what happens in 2 years, Zach Kuntz is on waivers, and you go, yeah, this is his 4th year, and tight ends can come from right there as well and end up being the same thing. So I don't chase tight end. I just kind of wait for everyone else to chase it. The only problem you can get into is if you're in these leagues and every other person rosters 4 or 5 tight ends, then obviously there's no replacement value on the tight end.
I was going to say, let's go to Rich, because I know that there's going to be a differing opinion here.
Scott's so off base here. So, no, listen, Scott's right from that standpoint when you're talking about that tight end 5, that tight end 6. Like, what's the difference between tight end 4? You're right. There's not much of a difference. But where there is a difference is those top 1 to 4 guys, right? They're difference makers. And tight end premium, they're finishing as high-end wide receiver 2s. Travis Kelce is an outlier. He's a wide receiver 1 in a lot of those formats. So the way I look at it is, when we play Dynasty, we're trying to get an edge over our league mates. Where do we do that? Like, running back, we all know, is the most fluid position out there. Wide receiver is the deepest position out there. Quarterback, super flex, we all want them. But where you can get your edge is that tight end position. So I look at the complete opposite. My number 1 target is, one, you want to know your league setting. So the difference between tight end premium, super flex premium, knowing where those extra value is increases your trade value too, because either the haves and the have-nots. So having like a TJ Hawkinson, a Mark Andrews, a Dallas Goedert, those guys give you a difference, make such a difference over your league mates, because they're the haves and the have-nots. And you're talking about 3 to 4 guys that even fit in that mold, where once you get out there, now you're talking about a couple 100 points lower. So if you miss out on those guys, I'm all for that. Like, you punt the position, but I would rather be a have and take a TJ Hawkinson earlier, a Kyle Pitts earlier, or my future husband, Dalton Kincaid, earlier, and have that edge over my league mates. Because listen, I know I can get value at wide receiver later, right? Like, I might miss out on that real young guy, but I can get Chris Godwin, who's going to give me a couple really good years. I'd rather have that young tight end that's locked in my roster for the next 7 years, which when you're playing Dynasty, 7 years is a lifetime, right? That is so long. If you go back 3 years and look at your league and look at your, like, all their rosters, those rosters look so different in that 3-year span. But if I can lock in one of those guys that's a top 4 guy that's going to outscore my opponent's tight end by, because you're terrible at drafting like teams like that. So if I can draft a guy that's going to score on average 6 to 7 more points than his tight end, that's a huge edge over my opponent, where they're all scoring about 8 to 9 points a game. My guys constantly give me double digits. I'm starting a 4th wide receiver at that position. So I look at the tight end completely different. I look at whether it's tight end premium or it's one tight end regular PPR points. That's still the edge that my opponents don't have. And when we get to the Dynasty Fantasy Football Championships, that'll be after your leagues like year 3, year 4. There's multiple really good teams, and there's multiple really bad teams. So the longer your league goes on, the actual harder it is, like that variance you were saying before, how hard it is on an equal playing field. What's hard when you're facing teams that have Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, Saquon Barkley, and Bijan? Like, those teams don't exist in redraft, but they exist in Dynasty. So you're looking at every edge you could possibly get, and that's the one position I do think gives you a edge over your opponents, because it's just like business world, right? It's the haves and the have-nots. So I'd much rather be a have at those premium positions than a have not, and where I'm chasing the Chigs. I'm chasing up and David Njoku. Can David Njoku be a focal point of that offense? Well, there's 18 more David Njokus out there. So I'd rather get the TJ Hawkinson and also I don't have to chase that position down the road as well. It's on my roster. So now I'm no longer chasing the tight end in my rookie draft because I'm desperate there, just like the other 10 teammates in my league. And I'd rather keep acquiring those guys in my rookie drafts because they take a little longer to develop. But when they hit, now all of a sudden, I got Mark Andrews, Kyle Pitts, and I have Chig. People are going to be desperate. Now all of a sudden, I get a first-round pick for an average tight end.
I just want to add this. I think what Rich is saying, we're on the same page. Here's where the tight end analysis goes wrong. You never want to plan to flex a tight end unless it gets to the 3 PPR that I talked about. What Rich is saying is you want to buy a positional advantage above replacement value. That doesn't matter if it's 1 PPR, 2 PPR. That's where tight end premium has totally jumped the shark. You never want to go, oh, you know what? I'm going to draft Mark Andrews, but then I'm going to draft tight end 8 in the startup because I can flex him. Mathematically, that is a bad decision. So really, you're buying the positional advantage. So Rich is correct, but you want to buy positional advantage against the market anytime. If you can say this quarterback in this scoring format is a positional advantage, you're buying that over the average of the rest of the field. So it's really just chasing the advantage above replacement, has nothing to do with the tight end premium. I think that's what's a little bit misunderstood.
I will say one thing. It is important, Scott, I agree with you. You don't want to actively seek to flex a tight end, but there's going to be times where flexing a tight end makes more sense than maybe starting any Texans wide receiver in your flex spot. Yes, Tank Dell. I know he's going to be a beast. He's also 5'6". You're going to have injuries on your team. You're going to have bye weeks, and sometimes it's going to hit you really hard. So if you have Dallas Goedert as your starting tight end, and instead of scraping Isaiah Hodgins off the waiver wire, you could put Pat Freiermuth in your flex spot. I think it's really important to do your due diligence because Scott did say tight ends don't matter. I know that's not your philosophy, but unfortunately, that is the narrative on a lot of fantasy Twitter, which is where a lot of people get a lot of their information. And sometimes you have to break down the narrative, do your due diligence. And guess what? You know why tight ends do matter, Garrett? Because the NFL draft last year said they do. A lot of tight ends were drafted, so we had to look at more than we had originally planned on it. But they do matter. You do have to do your research. You don't have to draft every single one of them, but it's important when you play Dynasty, know who these guys are, know the values, know your league when you're drafting or making trades so you know how to build your roster properly.
Yeah, go ahead.
I really love talking about tight ends because it's such a fun position. So I wasn't just playing on my phone. I just wanted to check out some PPR scoring from last year because I thought I knew it, but I didn't want to get quoted and then y'all blast me on Twitter or X or whatever. So there was 9 tight ends last year in between 9 and 10 points in PPR scoring, like their tight ends per game. Like no one does other scoring like yearly, right? So per game. And that's like your tight end 4 through 12. To me, that's the definition of they don't matter. Other than, again, Travis Kelce, who's wide receiver 1, I gave up on a couple years ago because I hate old people. But Mark Andrews, Kyle Pitts, because he's a unicorn and what he could be. And maybe, yeah, you take a shot on Dalton Kincaid at 109 in a draft. But I love David Njoku. Like, if someone wants to trade me David Njoku and give me something on top of it for Dallas Goedert, bro, we could talk. Ma'am, we can talk.
All right, well, let's move on from the very exciting tight end position. And I want to talk to you guys real quickly about buying and selling players because that's one of the biggest parts of fantasy football is, Rich talks about it all the time, knowing when to buy, knowing when to sell. So how do you guys evaluate when's that sell window for a player and when am I trying to buy this player because I think his value is going to increase?
Yeah, so over the years, I've tried everything to figure out, okay, what helps you, I guess what prevents you from making mistakes unintentionally? And it's things that you can't control. For instance, you look at the last 12 years, you go date back even 10 years and say, okay, each position, how long did that player stay in the top 5, right? And as we know, running backs have the most difficult time staying inside the top 5. Receivers have a little bit longer, certain positions. So whenever I get a player that is a top 5 at their position in terms of even in value, I try to drop them off my well, not drop them, but trade them off my roster for a future first and a player that's a tier or two below them that I think can ascend into that top tier. And what it does is it insulates my team from losing value long term. Because if you have what's a good example of this? Like Des Bryant's a good example because he was just here, and hopefully he's not here now. But handful of years ago, he was the wide receiver one. OBJ is another example of this. They're the wide receiver ones. You keep them on your roster, you're thinking, I'm going to get another wide receiver one season. They get hurt, and then they never come back. And you just lost all that equity. So as soon as I get a player like that, I try to move off of them. So Justin Jefferson's a great example of this. I think he's going to be really good for a long time. I'm from Minnesota. I love Justin Jefferson. But for me, I would trade Justin Jefferson, and I would look to acquire a Jalen Waddle plus a first or an Olave plus a first and something, a guy that I think can ascend into that top 5 if the price, and the price is right at that point. And then what ends up happening is if, let's say, Olave or whoever I have ascends into that position and now they're a top 5 wide receiver, I also have a 24 first or 25 first to go along with it. So I'm constantly just building my roster from top up. And if I'm starting 12 guys, you need to have as many shots as possible. My strategy changes quite a bit if it's a start 9. So I may not do that, right? So knowing your league setting is very important. But running back position, maybe I focus on receiver, but running back position for sure, as soon as I get a top 5 running back, I will try to get out from under them and take a tier 3 running back plus a future first or a wide receiver that can help solidify my roster. I do not want to hold on to any top 5 running backs, period, at any point in time.
So I'll give shout out to Izzy. He's been running Dynasty Trade Calculator forever, and it's always been one of the better versions of the market pulse. Anyone that plays in a lot of leagues. So everyone in the crowd, just vibe with me here. Who here plays blackjack or has played blackjack before? I play blackjack, but I also look at Dynasty very similar. There's a reason I play in so many leagues, and that's because a lot of times the decisions we're making are almost 50-50 decisions. 60-40, 55-45. The key with blackjack is it's the best game in terms of the odds against the house. It's not quite 50-50, but it's close. But why is blackjack good for somebody that knows how to play blackjack? There are times during the game where you go, the odds are in my favor. That's when you want to get the most money down. And it's the same with Dynasty. You have to picture every player being odds, like Vegas odds. Like, what are the odds that Justin Jefferson's going to go up in value or down in value? You kind of look at range of outcomes for players. When you go, you know what, it's getting really close to being at its peak. So let me take the bet on the other side. I mean, anyone that's seen me talk about leverage trading. A definition of leverage trading is basically moving down off of a piece, getting a second piece back, just like the example Izzy gave. That's essentially a Jalen Waddle and a first for Justin Jefferson is essentially a bet. Really, it's Jalen Waddle versus Justin Jefferson. And if in your mind you're sitting there going, you know what, there's a lot of variance, there's injuries, there's quarterback situations, that puts it at maybe like 60-40 that Jefferson maintains or produces above Waddle. Am I willing to take that bet? Is the 40% shot I'm getting worth that extra first? And then that's just to the constraints of your league. You would only do that deal once or twice if you only had 22 roster spots. Because at some point, you're going to get stuck where you have too many picks, too many players, you don't have enough top-end talent, and you've run out of roster spots, right? But as long as you understand that mathematical equation, that's how you build value. It's being player agnostic and going, hey, Garrett Wilson, wide receiver 3. The range of outcomes for him to go anywhere except for kind of neutral or down, that's the perfect player to go, you know what, I don't want to trade him. But why can you trade Garrett Wilson at wide receiver 3? Because this is the window where you can make that deal. Give it 6 weeks, you might not be able to make it. So it's just constantly looking at ways to really not lose anything. You're just lowering your odds of winning just a little bit. But man, when you can just stack those extra picks and extra value, then at some point you can go, I can spend it. And I'm the one that has the bankroll, and other people have to come to me when they want to make deals.
How you doing? Just talking about Garrett Wilson's interesting. Chris Olave, who I do love, but Scott's 100% right. You should be looking to trade those dudes right now. Like you could get Drake London in a first for Garrett Wilson. I know people that have done that. I'm not saying you. I'm just saying I know there's people that have done that because we think we know. Like Izzy kind of alluded to earlier, we know where these players are going to be in 4 years. Like we just know OBJ is going to be the wide receiver 1 in 5 years in 2014, and we were completely wrong. If we would have just tiered for the exact same player, Scott said it perfectly, player agnostic. Like the players don't matter. Literally, all that matters is the stats, age, etc. Like don't get attached to any of them. As soon as they're peaking, and you know when they're peaking, just move them.
That was lovely. Thank you. So one thing that I like to do is I like to sell based on speculation. I'm an Eagles fan, but I'm selling any DeAndre Swift share that I have. Everyone thinks that he's just going to come in and be this massive PPR back. If you look at how the Philadelphia Eagles play football, they have passed less every year that Nick Sirianni has been the head coach. Go to Pro Football Reference, click on Philadelphia Eagles. You can look at the reception season by season. Jalen Hurts just doesn't check the ball down. Will he check the ball down more than maybe that he has a massive contract? Maybe. I don't know. But why would he do that to somebody he's barely played with when he could just tuck it and run, which he's good at? The value that you will get for DeAndre Swift right now at a very fluid position like these guys are talking about, running back is one of the hardest positions to predict. If I could move DeAndre Swift for a guy like Alvin Kamara, who we've seen they definitely cater to in that offense when he comes back off suspension, I'm going to get plus assets. I think that's the move to go. The Philadelphia Eagles have a crowded running back room. Their room's going to be like the New England Patriots. It's going to be terrible. It's going to be horrible to predict unless you like to play best ball. So that's what, and especially if you're in a league of a lot of Eagles fans. Shane, I have DeAndre Swift for sale. No? Okay, well. Pork would probably bite on that, maybe. Pork will take all the DeAndre Swift. There you go. So you have to, it's again, knowing your league. If there's Eagles fans who are like, I want DeAndre Swift, come get him.
Now, how does this shift or change depending on if you're in a win now mode or a rebuild mode? Or does the philosophy stay somewhat the same? Like, how does that move and shake depending on those situations?
Are you talking about DeAndre Swift specifically?
Just in general, not. Yeah, I know you love talking about him, but just in general, the general thoughts around trading. If you're in a win now mode, does how you make moves
right.
as a win now team versus how you're making moves as a rebuild team, do those look a little bit different, or at the end of the day, is it just value?
It's all about value, and don't let people force you to make trades too. One thing that I really hate is, and I understand you have to start a lineup at some point in September. So when you're coming at me in May saying, "Hey man, you don't have a running back too," I don't care. I don't have to set a lineup for another 4 months. And a lot of things happen between now and then. Guys get hurt. Preseason comes. Guys that we think are going to be good are terrible. They get cut. They get traded. So I'm all about the value. If I'm wanting to win now, I'm obviously a lot more focused in. I want to get those younger but super productive players. Like I'm going after Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase. And if I'm in a rebuild, I'm okay with taking younger guys that are a flyer, like an Irv Smith, because I love talking about tight ends. Me and Rich, we know what's up. And I'm willing to move, but when you do move, try to never sell your own picks if you can help it, and always try to get plus assets on top of every move that you make.
Any other thoughts on win now trading versus rebuild trading?
I mean, yeah. So one thing, you kind of have to always trust the process, right? Even when you're win now, you have to look at your roster and go, what can I move that's valuable but not hurt my roster? Because what can I then do with that asset when I combine it with something else? The only difference for me in rebuilding is I'm slightly more aggressive, or I'm aggressive at both. I don't know. But I'm probably more aggressive in rebuilding because I want to hurry up and get that bottom out process finished.
Shout out to Shane. We are wearing our process over players shirts, which is our mantra at Trades in 5. Just an example. Would you ever purchase an auto insurance policy if you didn't have a car? Probably not. Would you drive a car without auto insurance? Some people do, but you're not supposed to. But the idea is there's no such thing as a all-in or rebuilding. If you're on either extreme of the spectrum, you're going to be in trouble. You always want to be where Izzy was talking about. Try to always get yourself there. I want to be competitive, but with a good insurance policy. Even if I'm rebuilding, it isn't like I've literally gutted my entire roster and I'm just banking on my ability to pick players in the draft. And I never want to be all in to where I have no insurance to fall back on if things go wrong. So I don't even like the term of being in a rebuild or being in a win now. Like if you're on either extreme, you're leaving yourself out to dry potentially. You always want to be in one or the other, but with the ability to pivot, get back to the middle, and go to the other extreme. And that's just by purely process trading, gaining value constantly. Even if you are the best team in the league, you'll hear people say, I'm the best team in the league. I don't want to trade with the other contenders. But if you can trade from your excess and pick up flexible assets, I don't really care if I'm giving things to other teams that could potentially beat me. It's helping my process, and I'm trading from my excess. I'm giving myself insurance when I really didn't think I would need it, but I'm putting that money in the bank where I can spend it later, especially during the season when I have more information. I don't know if Rich had anything to add.
Yeah. If I'm contending, I'm not bolstering my. You want to do it together? So I'm going to be different than a lot of these guys when I'm contending. It happens organically for me. So I never go after a win now piece and give up future draft equity. I'm either there or I'm not, because we talk about variance over the course of a season. Mm-hmm. Now imagine variance over the course of 1 week, right? So I've seen it all through Twitter, the amount of trades people make. It's the number one advice that I give somebody. Do not make a win now trade when you're going into the final couple weeks of the season, because it is. So example, we had 3 years ago, it was a Keenan Allen for CD Lamb trade, right? And this was 3 years ago, and I was arguing with the individual. I don't want to say arguing. We were having a conversation about that strategy, and I said, the 3 points that you're trying to get over CD Lamb, right, for that one position, for that one player, that 3 points. Think about how many fantasy weeks that you have that the matchup is within 10 points, and then do it within 5 points, and then do it within 3 points, and go through your entire season, and it's under 10%. Most fantasy matchups are won by double digits. Most of them are. So you're trading for a player, you're really just hurting your future, and you haven't really increased your odds enough to justify the trade. So do not trade your future first for contending, and I always keep my seconds too, because that's where you get the Amon-Ra St. Browns, and you get those players that now you got another top 10 player on your roster, and all you had to use was a second-round pick. Somebody is going to get that player. Every season there is a second-round pick that I want to have a shot at that. And that's better for my rosters than trying to buy a championship and that 10% chance that actually pays off for me. So if I win organically, and then I have these teams that I've built so much equity. He's talking about value in just your portfolio. I'm a finance guy. I've been in finance since I've been done with college, and I look at my dynasty teams the same way.
Yeah, there's a lot said here, and I have a lot of opinions, but I'll try to keep it brief. But I play completely differently than a lot of these guys, because even like for Dynasty nerds, like how we built and how we still build Dynasty, we look at a very simple platform, right? Who to buy, who to sell, who to draft. That's all the information I care about. Who to buy, who to sell, draft. And like Scott said, there's windows, right? And it's what we do while we're speaking on this panel. Is like it's on us to go out on our podcast, our sites, and give our opinions on when those windows are, because they're real small. You know what also is small? Your opportunity, quiet down. Your opportunity to win a championship. And I think sometimes in Dynasty, people get too caught up in, I'm not winning that trade. I lose that trade. And obviously it depends where your team is, like what kind of trades you're going to make. Or you'll put a trade out there on Twitter and be like, I traded player X for player B. And then somebody else on Twitter will be like, that's bad value. You could have got player C over here. I'm like, well, dude, the guy in my league wasn't trading player C, so this is my best option. And sometimes that's what it boils down to in Dynasty, because you don't have a lot of trade partners sometimes in Dynasty. If your league is kind of not very active in that market. So for me, anytime I'm in a championship window, I trade all those assets that they're talking about, the future first, the future seconds. I'm giving those away. If there's an opportunity for Robert system that he knows and be a wide receiver too, and it costs me a second-round pick, I have no problem getting away those draft picks, because, again, those draft picks are 50-50 at best. My window to win a championship in Dynasty is so small. And that's all we play this game for, right, is to win. Like, who cares? You know how many times you see people in Dynasty over the last 20 years, like, look at this team on paper. In 5 years, I'm going to win 25 straight championships. Never comes to fruition. Never does. I've never seen it happen for how good it looks on paper. Even though I was at dinner with somebody yesterday, and they showed me it might have been the greatest Dynasty team I've ever seen. I don't know how he did it. It's unbelievable. So, like, I play to win the game, right? So, like, if I'm in a position and I'm giving up an asset where the community thinks I'm losing that trade, but it betters my team, then I'm going to make that trade because I'm trying to win titles. Because nobody's telling their grandkids about how many times they came in second place because they're not impressed. But you say that you won 3 straight Dynasty championships, that's hard to do, and it's pretty impressive, and your grandkids are going to love you a little bit more. I promise they will. So, and we also talk about this as well, I think, that teams don't do is the small trades. Like, we're all talking here trading Justin Jefferson, trading for CeeDee Lamb. You win championships, like, early in the season by small trades, acquiring those older players. That's how you have depth. Like, you don't have to go in and go all in and give up 2 firsts for the stud guys. If you have a championship caliber team, odds are you have a really good starting lineup. How do I insulate that? How do I add guys that, honestly, I hope I don't have to start in my championship game? But then all of a sudden, a week comes up where a game gets canceled or a player's hurt or they're sitting out this week, you need depth. So I'm okay with wasting a second-round pick on a guy like, I know Robert Woods is a bad example, or like a guy like Adam Thielen, which you might be able to get cheaper, but, you know, they're getting paid. You know, a guy like Odell Beckham, he might come in here. He might give us wide receiver 2 numbers. I can get him for a second-round pick. Or a running back who's older like Derrick Henry, who he knows on the very back end of his value. You give up a first-round pick for him. And you're like, dude, you're giving up a first-round pick for 1 year? If it helps me win a championship, I'm doing that. And definitely you're a contender. So when the further you get back in your rookie draft, the less odds you have of that player hitting anyway. So anywhere from rookie pick 10 to 12, the odds of that guy hitting and even be rosterable on your roster, just to be like your 30th guy, is 50%. But if I make this trade, it increases my odds to win a championship 10, 20%, I'm doing it. Because honestly, that's the only reason I play this game is to win titles. So for you to do that, and we're all doing the same way, whether you're rebuilding or you're going on. And then when I was 5,
Don't do it. Hey, listen, Rich is one of my favorite people in the industry. If I went on vacation for 2 years and I didn't have access to internet, I would let Rich run my teams with a stipulation that he couldn't trade my first-round picks. So I respect him a lot. But I trust Rich, like everybody on this panel, I trust to make that decision to decide if you want to trade a 2024 first to win now. When I'm giving out advice to people that are either learning or they're novices or they're just not, if you don't feel like you're at our level, then, and you're listening to what we have to say, I don't know if I would say, hey, you probably have the ability to trade your 2024 first and make the right decisions without costing yourself the future. I've seen Rich do what he does, but not cost himself the future. He's able to maintain the balance. But not everybody can do that. So you got to limit the amount of exposure you have to unnecessary risk. And that's kind of like the advice. What he's saying is very wise, right? And I've done that I've only done that in 1 league ever. But what Rich does and what I do are very different when we come to winning now or rebuilding, but we're both successful in that craft because we've practiced that craft for a very long time. So find what feels good for you and what you enjoy doing the most, but ensure that you're protecting yourself from unnecessary exposure.
All I just want to say is the best part about Dynasty is I can play leagues against Rich. I can play leagues against Shane. It's differing opinions. I will just say, like, Izzy and I are very similar. If every league I had was filled with 11 Izzies or 11 me's, it would be a grind. It would be, man, I'm trying to do everything he's trying to do. So I think there's value in being able to, the last thing I'll say about this topic is there's value in being able to read people. Ultimately, as the Dynasty community evolves, there's a lot more content. There's more content about Dynasty than ever. Any site you go to is talking about Dynasty. Now, some of it's basic, some of it's more analytical or advanced, but the idea is it's growing. The biggest edge, I think, going forward is going to be able to read your league. Read the managers in your league. What is going on in the league and being able to find an edge, whatever it is. So you got to be flexible, but I think that's the edge that no one really talks about is the psychology, just reading people. It's reading the industry you're in.
I mean, just to Scott's point, and kind of to Rich's point, and Izzy's, everyone. I agree with everyone. They're all great. you should know your league. Like, if I make this trade, is this the only trade I'm going to be able to make? If I trade away this pick, am I going to be able to recoup a pick later? Like me, I'm slightly aggressive when it comes to trading. There's a reason I'm on Dynasty trades in 5. Like, that's my favorite thing because I don't want to say I know I can outsmart you, but I make enough trades that I think I can win in the volume. I've had trades where I've traded away Lamar Jackson at the end of last year because he was hurt, and I got him back 4 weeks later. Now, did I have to pay a little bit extra to get him back? Sure, it was a third. I could give a shit about a third. The hit rate on those doesn't exist. And yes, you can use a third for a Latavius Murray in season. I can also find that on waivers. So just my only point on that is you got to know your league. If you guys aren't making trades, gals aren't making trades like that, there's not 60 trades a year, you probably shouldn't be doing like just all-in moves on the basis that you're not going to be able to recover from it if it doesn't work.
All right, we've got like 4 minutes left. We'll take a couple quick questions, and then you can try to hit up the guys afterward if you have any other questions.
A lot of times we're talking about trading for future first and even tearing down and getting that future first. But doesn't the hit rate of a future first have to play into the account that when you're tearing down, you could end up with, you tear down from Garrett Wilson, and now you've got, this is a bad example, but like a Trey Sermon back on top of what you were trading for. Like, that's worth nothing, and now you've teared down and you didn't actually leverage the asset, even though in theory the first was so valuable.
Well, so if you make that pick, that first, you've probably screwed up. Like, that first is just another asset to add something else to improve somewhere else. Like, I don't ever trade for a first with the intention of actually making it. No, but that's the intention. My intention is, all right, what else can I do with this first and another player at some point? Or can I split this first at some point? Like, I don't ever really trade for it. Like, oh, I really can't wait to draft Nicholas Singleton in 2025. Yeah, I don't know that I'm going to be alive in 2025. So I'm probably not. No, there's no chance. So I'm probably going to try to use that asset for something that can help me right now. And it's also the psychology of it, right? It's just you have a first. It's this mystery box item. It could be anything. It's the Family Guy meme. And it's a true story. Yeah, and that's a true story in our game.
All right, time for one last question. Yeah.
So kind of a combo, like you said, you like to sell on speculation, and then you can top 5 assets, kind of the best time to sell. So how do you balance that with a guy like Bijan Robinson, who's already got like that top 5 capital, but we've never even seen him step on the field? Like, how are you valuing someone like that?
It's a great question. So unless I am dead sure that I'm top 2 or 3 team, which is kind of funny because you're drafting 101. So how did you get Bijan to begin with? It's either you traded for that pick and you end up being the first overall, or you're at the bottom. If you are at the bottom, you should not have Bijan Robinson on your roster, period. It makes 0 sense. You're not going to really get that much more value. The only place it's going to go is south. So you got to move Bijan for multiple firsts in the future or multiple players. Like he was saying, well, if you have a 24 first, what's the hit rate on that? Obviously, it goes down with every additional pick that you're drafting in that first round. But you have the ability, once you're in that position, to trade that pick for any player that's available, right? You have 12 teams. Every single person in your league wants a pick. There's nobody that says, I don't want, aside of Rich, there's nobody that doesn't want picks. So it's you're just opening up the market for yourself, and Bijan's a great example. You have him. You have open market to do whatever you want, open architecture. You can get almost any player, access to any player. So there's your benefit, but you don't want to hold on to Bijan. You want to pivot away from him and pick up equity, and then maybe go down a tier or 2 and still have a good chance to compete. Because we don't even know what Bijan's going to do this year.
All right, guys, that wraps up our time for the Dynasty panel. Thank you guys so much. Yeah, give them a round of applause.